Hey, Ron, thank you for coming in. You really have quite a marvelous background. President of the Shon Group, you're founding general partner Reds Capital. You have investments like in natural resources and education, and food. You've been an investor in restaurants and things like that. You've got a really interesting public face as well. You're one of the premier global developers, particularly in Vancouver development and asset management. You've done public roles like with the Vancouver Opera, St. George's School, St. Paul's Hospital Foundation, the Bank of Montreal Asian Advisory Committee, the Bank of Board of Trade. You're famous for being sort of the developer enabling the Sun Yat-Sen Gordon, which is a really famous area in here. And in prior interviews, you've talked about things like fast money as a favorite podcast, AI as a favorite trend. You've talked previously about the fourth industrial revolution and always having a plan. So we're going to mine some of that marvelous career, and you're very, very active still, and definitely keep up with tech, even to the point where we did a mutual conference together in Portugal a few years ago. This is, I guess, it's pre-COVID, you were talking to quite a famous professor at MIT, and he was thinking you were an engineer and things like that. So it just shows you the acumen you have and the marvelous background you have. So, Ron, thank you for coming in.
Well, Stephen, it's a pleasure to be here. And you're overly kind. I think that if you weren't doing what you're doing right now, you'd be a great in PR.
Yeah. Yeah, public relations is would be an interesting field to be in, right?
Mhm.
Especially if you get commissions and things like that, like representing Drake or something,
Right.
or being an agent,
Mhm.
perhaps, right? So Ron, I've known you for since the summer of 2011, where we met in person, and because we had a mutual investment in another country, and the founder of that company said, "Hey, I have a partner in Vancouver," and you picked up the phone, you asked me, you called me, which was like, and at that time you could take phone calls, so you could just.
Right.
I mean, you can't do that anymore, but and that's how we met. We become great friends, and we're business partners as well. Now, Ron, you have a marvelous background, though, just a tremendous history of accomplishment. But what were the inflection points that made this marvelous life you have today? And I'm talking, don't start with your, you went to Stanford and then you got your MBA at Wharton. Let's go back to when you were, 3 and 5 years old. It could have been things that happened in the family. It could have been things that happened in your early education mentors. Could have been challenges you had throughout your life. But what are those inflection points? Three. With you, there'd be like 20, but let's say three that really shaped to who you are today.
I think the first inflection point was when I realized that there are many, many smart people in this world. And I remember in grade school getting just very good grades, very, very good grades. But then someone said to me, that's great, but there's a world outside of grade school, and there are people who are way, way smarter than you are, and that kind of resonated with me. So I've always respected people who are more intelligent, maybe more thorough, have a broader view, people like you, for example, Stephen. Okay, um, as I realize that as I go through life, I meet people who are very special, very extraordinary, and all through school, in grade school, I was a top student. In high school, I was a very, very good student, but not the top. At university, I was just okay, and then at grad school, I was just average. So you see the trend here, okay? The higher you get, so to speak, the more special people you meet, And the more I became sort of humbled by the people that I met, and awareness of the fact that there are some very, very special people out there. So that's one sort of inflection point. Okay. Um, the second inflection point was when my father passed away. And I realized that I had been, I was going to be thrust into running the family business, something that I felt I wasn't really prepared for. Okay. And to be honest with you, I made a bunch of mistakes. Okay. Luckily, they were not fatal, but I learned a lot. Okay. And I learned the value of hard work. I learned the value of persistence, of just sort of sticking to um, uh, the game plan and just grinding it out. Okay? And then I think the third inflection point was something that you had a lot to do with. Uh, I remember sitting in my office, oh, what, 10 years ago, maybe longer, and we were talking about trends. Okay. And, we came to the conclusion, or I came to the conclusion anyway, that artificial intelligence, of all the emerging technologies out there, would be the one that would affect the world the most. And so here we are, 10, 11, 12 years later. And luckily, we've been right. Companies on the hardware side and now on the software side have been doing great things. And AI is definitely changing the world for the better, I think. Um, and so, over the last number of years, I have tried to be be aware of changing developments in the artificial intelligence area. I've tried to keep up as much as I can, and I think that those are the inflection points in my life that have really you know uh, uh, affected my way of thinking and how I conduct my daily life.
Okay, so let's kind of mine that a little bit further. So you're saying one of the inflection points in your life was you were a really great student. You were
Mhm.
top of the class, that kind of
Mhm.
thing when you were in your early grades,
Mhm.
and but you had somebody tell you that there you can be
Yeah.
at the top of the class, but there's always somebody else somewhere else,
Yes.
and they're at the top of the class too. And
Right.
then out of the many top of the class, there's going to be others who are top of the class,
That's right.
basically. And,
Right.
and so you begin to realize that as you're going and progressing through your education, whether it's primary, elementary school, you wait in high school, and then you end up at Stanford, and Stanford is considered, in many respects, Stanford is number one in the world. And then you did well, but you realize, wow, there's some really
Yes.
interesting people at Stanford, and again, as I mentioned, Stanford is ranked number one in things like innovation. The greatest number of founders in the world come from Stanford.
Hmm.
John Hennessy, the chairman of Alphabet,
Hmm.
was 16 years the president of Stanford. So it's a great school. And
Hmm.
yeah, you did well.
Hmm.
But you could see this sort of realization of this kind of early lesson, one of the inflection points, and then you end up at Wharton, and Wharton is considered one of the best MBA programs in the world for getting business education, and to be accepted, and you were there, and you graduated from Wharton, so really a great foundation. But also you had this understanding that you have ability, but there's other people have ability as well. And,
Yes.
and so that's kind of one inflection point. The other inflection point is when your father passed, and in fact, you had just graduated from a Wharton when you got the word that your father had passed away. And I believe you're the eldest son. So you
Yes,
have
I am.
to, so in traditional kind of Asian families, you're in Canada, you have to take on that mantle. and graduating from Wharton with a undergrad at Stanford, you thought probably you're going to go into investment banking, maybe work on Wall Street or something like that. And then you end up having to understand your family business and the investments that have been made. And so, can you give a little bit of history of that inflection point? Why it was a big undertaking to take over for your father, and who your father was, or what he represented, and then we'll talk about the AI side, and we'll go to that part of what you do. So,
Sure.
uh, can you give us some history of your family?
Sure, yeah. Our family was we came to Canada some 50 years ago, or I did anyway. My father before me had been investing in Canadian real estate since the early 1950s. And
Oh,
yeah, and he viewed the investments in Canada as a sort of a safe haven type investment. Okay. And so over the many years that he'd been doing this, he built up a pretty good sized portfolio. Okay? And it was always our meaning his and my hope that we would work together for a number of years. But of course, that never happened because he passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And so I was sort of thrust into this position, and I'll be the first to admit that I wasn't ready. Psychologically, probably from an acumen point of view, wasn't ready. I was very, very green. Okay. And what I wanted to do actually was work somewhere else and make my mistakes on somebody else's dime before coming into the family business. Okay. But as I said, that didn't happen. As a result, I was thrust into this position where I really wasn't ready. Okay. And so that's what happened. Um, at that time, my family had investments in real estate primarily. And I decided to sort of look at other things. Some of the things that you mentioned, I got involved in later years. So
yeah, and in fact, your father was also a notable business person in Japan, right?
yes,
And he ended up building one of the largest businesses in Japan, and then he exited, right, and
yes,
moved all of his family into Canada.
Mhm.
And you did some early schooling and boarding school as well, right, before Stanford.
yes. Yes. Yeah. My father was sort of the classic entrepreneur. He 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 never went to school for any length of time. I think he stopped going to school at grade 5, and so he grew up during the Second World War. Their family moved to the Philippines, and that's where he met my mother. And so they spent a number of years there. And then what happened was, right after the Second World War, he heard about the fact that the U.S. government was giving grants to people to set up restaurants and bakeries and convenience stores in some of their occupied territories. One of the occupied territories was Okinawa, which is now an island. It's an island part of Japan. So they moved there, and so he set up stores, bakeries, tailor shops, dry cleaning. sort of the infrastructure, all the infrastructure required for U.S. military uh, occupation. And um, so he did whatever it took to make a dime. The classic entrepreneur. Okay, and so um, after after a number of years, he did very well, and he decided that he would move some of his money to a more stable environment, and he picked Canada, and so that's why I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, investing since the 1950s. I mean, that's Canada was like, I mean, Vancouver was not that developed in the
That you're
1950s.
right. Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah, and so and your parents sent you to boarding school in the U.S. and so you got that kind of experience, and then of course you went to Stanford. Um, you're a golfer, and you were on the Stanford golfing team, I think, right?
yes. I was. Yes. The thing is,
Yeah, but there's other very famous golfers that came out of the Stanford golfing system, as we
yeah,
know.
Tiger, Tom Watson. Yes, yes, that's right. Yeah, those are really fun days. A long time ago, 55 years ago. So it's been a while. Yes.
Yeah, and then I know that when you went to Wharton, you had to sort of upgrade your math, right?
Yes,
Because
yes, yes. And that's you bring up an interesting point, Stephen. Okay. Um, uh, Wharton the Wharton program is fairly quantitative. So you have to know how to add and subtract. Okay. Well, at Stanford, all I did was read, and so from a reading and writing point of view, I was not bad. Okay, but I never had to deal with numbers or anything like that. So at Wharton, the one of the requirements is a statistics course, which initially I had a big problem with because I just wasn't used to it. So I had to sort of re-gear my mind to thinking quantitatively. Okay, and that was a very good thing for me, okay? Because in business, you have to be able to add and subtract, um, and some of the stuff that we're doing right now, especially when it comes to due diligence, learning the relationship between numbers is very important. Uh, that kind of skill is very important in accounting as well. And obviously, in the tech area, numbers are the key to everything. So anyway, yeah, I'm glad I went there. I'm glad I finally learned how to. relearned how to use numbers. Okay, which has been a great thing for me. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, now keep in mind you're gonna find people at Wharton who have a degree at MIT or Caltech,
Yes, that's right.
who are
That's
then going
right.
to get their business degrees. So you'd be humbled
Okay.
initially, right? As you're picking up your math expertise. And then, of course, because of hard work, you're one of the most hardest working people I've ever met. And
Well,
you're
thank you.
always learning. So you just immersed yourself and said, I've got to do it. You did it, right? So,
Mhm.
okay, so you graduate from Wharton. We got some of the family history, quite a remarkable history, really pulling yourselves up by the bootstraps and bootstrapping your businesses, becoming great
Mhm.
businesses, becoming really great investors, even from the 1950s. And then you having to take over your family business. And again, there's nothing like doing, right? There's all the
That's right.
book learning, but all the Wharton stuff, but actually running businesses is a lot is about relationships and understanding the particular environments where you got the investments, because it's like mini cultures. And the business environments are different depending on the region and things like that. And you have to become accustomed to the dynamics of that region. And I remember you sharing with me a story of one of the first investment deals you made, though, once you'd taken over the business. Can you share that? Because I think it's really interesting. You were in Texas, I believe, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was in Dallas, and we had made a number of investments in Dallas, and so I was on the highway, and I noticed this great big black office building that was very striking. A very large suburban office building, 680,000 square feet. So that's about well, anyway, it's a significant building, okay? And and I remember thinking, boy, that's well located, and I knew that it was the headquarters for J.C. Penney's in the Southwest. Okay? And I didn't really give it much thought until 2 months ago. Um, I was approached and told that it was for sale because the owner, who was a developer, a very famous developer in Dallas, was having some issues. So I thought, oh well, okay, maybe it's worth taking a look at. So I flew down there and met with the selling agent, cut a deal with the owner, and bought it for $36 million. Um, and then what I did was I went in there and um, basically worked the building. Um, I rolled up my sleeves and started to generate income from the building in ways that were very, very simple, but maybe a large organization would not do. For example, charging for parking. There was a surface lot of over 1,000 cars, and they weren't charging. So what I did was I said, okay, fine, everybody, you have to pay $15 a month. So $15 is nothing, okay, except when it's over 1,000 times uh, every month, the numbers get, they pile up pretty fast. Okay. Another thing I did was uh, rent space in the lobby, it was a huge lobby, but I created retail space. Okay. And then luckily the market in Dallas, the office market in Dallas improved. So everything sort of came together at the right time. And 3 years later, I sold it at a very, very good price. And it was a very it was a very good win for me at that age. And so I was very happy about that. Um, it's just sort of a testament of to sort of hard work, grinding it out. And I think if you pay attention to detail, you generally do pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, but you still apply those lessons when you do asset management, right? Because you
Of
look
course.
into an
Yeah.
existing property and you'll say, I'm going to take over the management of this property, but I'm going to do it better than
Hmm.
how it was done before, especially if it's a new property, right? And you
Yes.
do. You give it. You think of ways of being much more economically creative and enhancing the value creation that's coming out of that property, better use of space.
Yes.
You look, you're applying always the same principle, right? You're always walking through that property and you're thinking, is that being used correctly and
Mhm.
things like that,
Yeah.
right?
Right. And that's really the same principle that we apply to all our businesses, all our investments. Um, you know, looking at investments from a broad concept point of view is really great, but the money a lot of the money is made when you really roll your sleeves up and you look at these investments from a detailed point of view and figure out how to enhance the value. Sometimes these values are incremental. These increases are incremental, but you know, a number of incremental improvements altogether result in some giant invest improvements, you know.
Yeah, yeah. It's like the additive impact of your investment in Texas, right? I mean, you thought 1,000 cars, why don't we charge a monthly fee? And
Mhm.
you looked at the lobby wasted space.
Yes.
Why don't we put retail in there?
Yeah.
And so it's and just rethinking how
Right.
that space is being used, that kind of detailed thinking you apply to everything you do, whether your investments in restaurants prior and you're in natural resources and of course education and things like that. So now let's talk about you talked about this third inflection point. So you talked about the early inflection point. You talked about the sort of the mid inflection point of where you took over your family businesses. It's a big learning experience. But by illustrating what you did in Texas, it gives you the audience a mindset of how you function, right? Now how you learn, and then you realize that tech is a big transformative area in the world, and including over 10 years ago, 11 years ago, you're realizing that AI is going to really have some big impact. So can you talk about where do you think AI is going? Because you keep up on this.
Yeah. Well, no, I think the most important point is that artificial intelligence is a tool that will help um, our daily lives from here on in, 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years from now. Okay? It's something that is not to be feared. It's something that one should try and understand. Um, I think that, as I said, of all the emerging technologies that are out there, AI will have the most impact of anything that I know. Okay, and that's evident in the companies that are out there doing business in the AI area. Okay, I mean, all you have to do on the hardware side is look at Nvidia. I mean, it is now the most valuable company in the world, and 10 years ago, they were nowhere. Okay. Not nowhere, but they were much, 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 much smaller. They were not the subject of daily and conversations in the financial community. Okay. You take a look at Anthropic and OpenAI on the software side. Okay. 7 years ago, where were they? They weren't around. And today, each one of them have a valuation of close to $1 trillion, and that's with a T. 1 trillion. I mean, that's a huge amount of money, okay, in a matter of 7 years. So, um, that's the kind of value creation that artificial intelligence has created. Um, and I think the trend will continue because artificial intelligence sort of feeds on itself. I mean, it gets better. It gets better and better and better, kind of by itself. As you know, Stephen. I mean, we don't have to go into you know agentic AI and recursive and all that kind of stuff, but I think that your audience will appreciate the fact that there are aspects of artificial intelligence today which will enable it to get better without human intervention, which is a mind-boggling thing, but it's here. Okay. So,
Yeah, in fact, let's mine Nvidia before, because you were saying 10 years ago.
mhm.
Actually, 10 years ago, it was worth about 20 to 30 billion.
Right. That's
And
right.
that's 10 years ago. And then in 2020, they were on par with Intel. And so, because the stock market
Mhm.
fluctuates somewhere between 90 to, let's say, 120 billion.
Hmm.
in 2020, and they were considered like on par, equal, right?
Right.
And now Nvidia last year in October hit over 5 trillion. Now they are well
Hmm.
enconced or situated at the 5 trillion plus more 5.2, 5.3 trillion, right? And but can you imagine if you had invested in Nvidia back 10 years ago, you would have made, like what, a 300x gain or something?
Hmm.
Or yeah, and
Yeah,
that's a big company, and you're making that kind of gain,
that's
right?
right. Yes. Yes.
I mean, it's so from 20 billion roughly now to, let's say, moving towards 6
Hmm.
trillion.
Hmm.
And then you talk about OpenAI. I mean, and people can look this up. I'm just going from memory, but um, there was an investment by Vinod Khosla in 2019 of 50 million into OpenAI, and now, as you mentioned, they're a trillion. Um, Anthropic just a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, they raised around 550 million. They raised about 120, 124 million. If you invested in that first round, you would have made about it 1,800 times at their IPO to
Hmm.
what, roughly 1 trillion. That's pretty good returns, right?
I'd say so. Yes. And I
So,
think those kinds of returns, maybe not from a percentage point of view, but these companies will continue to become more and more valuable for sure.
yeah, I mean, we used to think that a big deal was a unicorn. Now
Right.
you're getting companies, startups within a few years. Anthropic is not that old,
No,
which has become a kilocorn, like $1 trillion, more than a billion, a
yeah,
thousand times a billion. I mean,
that's right.
it's just remarkable.
That's right.
And then we'll probably see then companies hitting the 10 trillion market valuation, right? And
Yes.
I remember I did a meeting with you with Jimmy Pattison, and we were talking about all of the things that are happening today. We actually talked to Jimmy, and Jimmy is quite a well-known investor and entrepreneur here in Canada. In the meeting, we talked about these things with him, and this was quite a few years ago. I guess this was pre-COVID. We were mentioning that all of these things are going to explode. And I remember you did an introduction to Paul Lee, who's one of the early investors in D-Wave. And of course, quantum has now just gone through the roof as
Yes.
well, right?
Mhm.
So all of these things that you've seen this remarkable journey, both in the hard work, and now quantum is exploding, and then in AI. Do you use AI every day?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think that most businesses in the world use AI today. And even in our sort of main business, which is real estate, it's real estate has traditionally been a slow adopter of new technology. But even today, um, uh, AI is used in our industry for sure. Okay. And I mean, every time I turn on my iPhone, I use AI. Every time I Google something, I use AI. So yeah, I mean, it's something that you really cannot do without, and your
Yeah.
reliance it is going to get more and more.
Yeah, in fact, Google used to be you would get all of these search results and you had to go look individually into all of them to kind of figure out what's happening. Now it returns an AI generated summary first.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it's great.
And they were forced to do it
Mhm.
because if they didn't do it, they would lose their search business, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really remarkable. And your car has AI in it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
probably wear a smartwatch.
Yeah.
I mean,
the fact that so many people use AI is the reason why these companies have become so valuable because they produce goods and services that are demanded worldwide, and that's the difference between these large technology companies and sort of And companies that are in traditional businesses like manufacturing or real estate, those businesses are fairly localized. Whereas, these technology companies, especially these AI related companies, are used around the world. So their values increase a lot quicker.
Yeah, I mean, you were one of the first to see sort of the value of digital as well, digital currencies and things like that. You even had, I don't know if you still had it, you used to have this kind of machine in the lobby of one of your major investment buildings where you have your office,
Mhm.
which dealt with cryptocurrencies. Do you still have that, or is that?
No, unfortunately the company that put it in just couldn't make enough money, so they decided to pull that machine out.
But that whole market is still there,
Oh,
right?
it's still there.
So
It's still there. Yeah, it's
yeah, it
still there.
hasn't gone
Yeah,
away.
yeah.
Do you ever consider having your own robot? Because you see the Unity robots, you could actually buy them for the home
Yeah.
for, I think it's under 13,000. So I mean, it's like buying a small car, right? I mean,
Right.
I wear hearing aids; they cost as much as a robot. So
Wow.
have you ever thought of maybe
Yeah.
next year? No.
Well, no, maybe not, but I mean that's an interesting idea. I mean, it's coming for sure. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, or the figure AI figure three it has autonomous capability, right? So it can walk around and you can
Mhm.
take it for walks and and it's humanoid. It has a human kind of form factor. I'll bet you, Ron, that in a few years you'll have a robot in your home.
That would be interesting. Yes. Yeah.
So, do you think then that we're going to hit AGI, artificial general intelligence, in a way where it can run your business, where you could just say, AI, run this thing, and you don't even have to prompt it. It just goes off and does it.
I, it maybe, although I think AGI is probably still a number of years away. Okay. I mean, people talk about, um, uh, uh, certain companies achieving, AGI, but I think those are sort of isolated examples, and uh, um, my feeling is that um, it'll come, but it's not anytime soon, like in the next couple of years. I also believe that, and this is the old person speaking. This is me as an old guy speaking. Um, I'm not 100%. I would not trust it, an AGI to run my business 100%. There's always room for human intervention, like me, for example. Okay. I'm not, I don't trust the completely, my gut tells me it's coming, but would I trust an AGI to run my business? Probably not right now anyway, you know. Um, but for sure it's coming. For sure. Okay.
So how about you? I mean, you have a brother-in-law, William Chang, who's
Yes.
quite sophisticated. He's
Yes.
with Westlake Group,
Hmm.
and he's pretty sophisticated in pharmaceutical stuff and tech and so on. Do you think he's more forward thinking in terms of where AI is, or do you think you're right up there with him? Or
Well, I don't know. I mean, well, Will is very, very knowledgeable. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, he's smart, Harvard educated, very, very successful. He's been in the venture capital business for many, many years. Um, and I know he keeps up with trends. And so he's somebody I respect a lot. Um, uh, Whether he knows more than he probably does know more than I do. Okay. But we never really uh, sit down and compare notes, if you know what I mean. But no, he's very knowledgeable, no question about it. Yeah.
Well, you're pretty excited though where things are going, right? Because you think there's a lot of opportunity and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stephen, when we got together, uh, I mentioned that, when I looked at the whole technology area, just from a numbers point of view, okay, um, y- y- um, take a look at the stock market, and you quickly figure out that the most valuable companies in the world are tech companies. At that time when we were talking, you know, there was Microsoft, Apple, Baidu, Google, okay. They were the top of the heap. Okay. Um, and the reason why was because they produced goods and services that were in demand worldwide. Okay. So as a family office, and as a person who's tasked with maximizing the value of, or the returns on capital that we have, you have to look at the tech area. And now, especially within the tech area, the artificial intelligence area, because that's where the greatest returns are going to be, not in your traditional businesses, which, I mean, they're going to be good. But they're sort of bread and butter type businesses. These old line businesses just cannot compete with the likes of Nvidia or OpenAI or Anthropic. There's just no way, you know. So if you're a responsible investor, you really should, yeah, look at tech, and especially the AI area.
Now, if you were to put a valuation on the total value of the commercial real estate marketplace in Vancouver, downtown Vancouver, could you put a number on that and square footage? And then we'll compare that to Anthropic.
Sure. Okay. Well, there are something like 27 million square feet of office space in downtown Vancouver. And I figured that today it might be worth 27 to 30 billion dollars, maybe on a good day. Okay. Canadian. Okay. Not US dollars. Okay. Well, compare that, and don't forget that the office space has been built over the last 150 years, right? Compare that to Anthropic or OpenAI, close to $1 trillion US. Okay.
Each.
And each, that's right, each, okay, built over the last 7 years. So it's just not, it's not a fair fight, the numbers, for Anthropic and OpenAI and Nvidia, they are so big, that the value of office space in downtown Vancouver is just a rounding error.
Yeah, in fact, Anthropic is only 4 years old.
That's right. Yes. It's incredible. Yes. That's right. Yeah.
So you you have your foot in the classical kind of real estate space. It must boggle your mind, right?
Oh, absolutely. It does. It just boggles the mind how quick this value creation has occurred on the AI side.
Yeah, you have Jan LeCun, who just founded his new company, Advanced Machine Intelligence Labs, or AMI, and he just raised around in January in a few weeks. And again, the audience should do their own due diligence, take a look. But like he raised over $1 billion at 5-6 billion valuation, and he just created the company.
Yeah. Yeah. But don't forget, it's Jan LeCun, though. I mean, so he's not just some guy. Okay. Yeah.
Or Fifi Lee with their
Yeah.
World Labs. I think her company's worth 30-40 billion rates.
That's right.
It's like all of
Stanford.
it, all of Delta Vancouver.
That's right. There's more. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. Now, Ron, so you got all of this side of it. How about natural resources? You are an investor in natural resources and things like that. Where do you think that's going to go? Um, you know, I'm just thinking, for example, the uranium marketplace. I could see that escalating because
Yes.
it used to be people were thinking nuclear, no, let's get out of that. Now, because of just what's happened in the world in the last year, in the last few months, actually, there's been this sort of re-energizing of things like, maybe nuclear is not a bad idea and things like that, right? So,
That's right. Yeah. Yes. We're very heavily involved on the natural resource side, but it's funny because some of the scarcity in natural resources is as a direct result of technological advances. For example, there are certain rare earths, rare minerals that are used in batteries, for example, used in Teslas, used in iPhones. Okay, and uh, so one of the smart things one should do is look at companies that produce those rare metals. Okay? There is a coming copper shortage, okay? Which is as a direct result of some of the technological advances that have occurred. These companies that have produced these advances use copper. Okay? Um, uh, Gold and silver have had a great run over the last couple of years. Okay? And so, yeah, we are heavily invested in those kinds of companies as well. Okay, these are old line companies, but they're not so old because the reason why their products are becoming more and more valuable is because of the tech side. So it's kind of related.
So Ron, we really had a great journey about some of the inflection points in your life, and we talked about the importance of technology and some of the predictions you're making, which are great areas to and opportunities for the community, also for investors, things like that. But you also have this whole public facing side, public facing in the sense of giving back to the greater good. Things like the Vancouver Opera, St. George's School, St. Paul's Hospital Foundation, the Bank of Montreal Asian Advisory Committee, the Bank of Board of Trade, Sun Yat-Sen Garden, etc. Can you talk about some of that work in the context, and then where do you see yourself in those kinds of roles going into the future?
Yeah, well, Stephen, I think that giving back to the community is very important. Especially if you've had the pleasure and the benefit of living in this country, okay, which is a real blessing, I think. Um, of all the public roles that I've had, the most interesting one was a Sun Yat-sen Garden project. Um, what happened was the city had allocated a certain area in Chinatown for the creation of a Chinese garden. And the people who convinced the city to do that were a couple of architects, a couple of community leaders, but they really didn't have any construction experience, number one, and number two, they really didn't have the ability to raise money. Okay, so one of them came to me and told me about this thing, and I thought it would be a great way to demonstrate one of the finer uh, things about Chinese culture. Okay, because what they were talking about is building a classical garden um, exactly like the ones they have in Suzhou, which is a city near Shanghai. So, so what we did was we arranged to have uh, 30 artisans come in from Suzhou and spend 9 months here in Vancouver, and they actually built the building. They built the gardens, so it's authentic in every detail. Um, And so what I did was I worked with the city, I worked with the province, I helped arrange the funding to do all this stuff. And so now what we have is a great piece of Chinese culture down in Chinatown. And so I would encourage your audience to visit if you're ever in Vancouver. It's very, very special. Okay? And so it's one of the things that I'm quite proud of because it's something very, very unique. And like I said, great example of Chinese culture. And obviously, I'm Chinese. Okay, so I'm a little biased. Okay, but yeah, very, very rewarding experience.
So that's a really great and lasting legacy and contribution. Let's talk a little bit more about your real estate work. You know, there's the Marathon Realty package, Langara Gardens, Shon Oaks, Place Victoria, Park Central 3, First Day Apartment Complex. There's the Ria Sisters Nurses of Vancouver Heritage Foundation, Cathedral Place, which is where your office is, Focal, London Plaza, Latner Village, Brick House West Business Park, and then kind of the list goes on and on. Did I get some of those wrong, or do
No,
you?
no, you've done your homework, Stephen. No, we've been involved in a number of different real estate transactions. Probably the one that's probably closest to my heart is the office building where my office is. It's called Cathedral Place, and it was the site of an old medical building, the old Georgia Medical Dental Building, which my family purchased in the early 1970s. And so what I did was I demolished the building and put up a new building um, uh, called Cathedral Place in 1990. Substantial completion was in 1990, and it's from an architectural point of view, it's very unique. So what I tried to do was create a building that looked sort of like the old building, but was brand new. And you mentioned the Rhea sisters. There were three terracotta nurses on the old building, and they were called the Rhea sisters: gonorrhea, diarrhea, and seborrhea. So I mean, it was somebody's joke, but it stuck. It stuck. Okay, so we took these statues down, and they are now in the Vancouver Museum on display. So, yeah, interesting development. Yeah.
And in fact, even HSBC building, you did that as well.
Yeah, across the street we put together that building when before HSBC became HSBC. It was the Bank of BC for those of you in the audience who remember the Bank of BC. I was close friends with the chairman of the bank. And so I convinced them that they should move there, and so we actually did the deal, and they were the lead tenant, as was the law firm Clark Wilson, and so that was in the late '80s, and so a long time ago now. Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course you've done things like investment banking with Solomon Partners, and you raised over 20 billion
Mhm.
in that, and had a great run with them, and just a remarkable sort of career in all the things that you've done and continue to do. You've even been partaking in the DC Finance Vancouver high net worth events, also Montreal, I think, in Toronto,
Yeah.
over a series of years. Can you talk about some of that work?
Yeah, I mean, the DC finance meetings are interesting because what they are is a gathering of family offices, high net worth individuals who come together to meet each other. They're great networking events. The founder, Denny Charest, brings in some very interesting speakers, and he's expanded very significantly over the last number of years. He's doing events now in Hong Kong, and all over North America. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I've participated in a number of them, and they've been very good. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you also were at the Horasis Global Summit.
Mhm.
It's quite a well-known summit founded by one of the co-founders of the World Economic Forum, who
Mhm.
co-founded the Asian or Asia Pacific part, and then he's created his own conference. But I thought there's a really interesting anecdotal story about that because you met somebody from MIT there, and quite a
Oh
famous
yeah.
professor. So could you relate that story?
Sure, yeah. Um, uh, I met a professor from MIT who was in charge of creating standards, and in the blockchain area. At that time, um, uh, blockchain was fairly new, and I found it very interesting. So I was lucky enough to be seated next to him on a panel. So we got talking, and we talked about many things in his area, and so I was lucky enough to get his attention for about 20 minutes. And then afterwards, he asked me about my background. So I explained what I did. And he said, "Oh, I thought you were an engineer." I said, "No, I'm not an engineer. Just a layperson, you know." And so anyway, I guess I learned enough uh, to carry on a conversation with him in that area. But and I was very happy to do that because I learned a lot. And so it was as a result of me sort of learning as much as I could about that area. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you've done things like being a director of China Education Resources, Spectra Group of Great Restaurants, Skyline Gold, et cetera. I mean, it just so it's expansive, all the different hats that you worn over your career. And Ron, do you plan to retire?
I don't. I have no plans to retire. No, none whatsoever. I'm 73 years old, and I still get to the office before anybody else. And I fully intend to continue what I'm doing as long as I'm physically able to do that. And I think I like what I do. I like learning. I like working. I like achieving things. And I won't retire until until I feel like, okay, I've had enough. And that's not going to be for a while.
Now, and you're also an avid golfer. What's your handicap now? And then you are also a tennis player,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you also run every
Yeah,
day.
yeah. I don't run every day, and I try and keep in shape. I try and keep in shape because I think um, if keeping in shape physically is helps with your mental framework, helps with your ability to do your job. If you feel good, you perform better, and if you are in good shape or in better shape, you will feel better, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so this is the last two questions, or last three questions. Is there any part of this story arc that we missed that you want to bring up? So I'll pause there and then I'll go to my last two questions.
Not really, Stephen. I mean, you know me so well. It's just, it's just this is just it's opportunity to talk. That's all it is, right? No, I mean, you've covered it all. Yeah.
Okay, then the last two questions are what recommendations do you want to leave the audience?
Mhm.
And then a sort of a side part to that question is what questions do you want to leave the audience and other questions that they should be pondering the
Yeah.
audience out there. So first of all, what recommendations do you want to leave the audience?
Okay. I think, my biggest recommendation to your audience is to maintain a positive attitude and never stop learning. Um, and open your mind to new ideas, good or bad, um, and decide for yourself, what is good, what's bad, but the ability to learn or the willingness to learn at any age, I think is very, very important. And that's what keeps you young, On um, questions. Yeah, I mean, I have questions about what the world will look like in 50 or 100 years. I think it'll be totally unrecognizable from where we are today. It wasn't what, 30 years ago where things like computers and iPhones were just sort of figments of one's imagination. I mean, who would ever thought that this phone that we've got here, okay, it is more powerful than than any computer was, say, 10 years ago. I mean, I can do things on this phone that 10 years ago people wouldn't have ever dreamed about. So 50 years from now, what's the world going to look like? Okay. Um, are we going to be living in a sort of world of science fiction? I don't know. Okay. But, I wish that I could be alive 50 years from now. I probably won't be. But, I think it would be a very interesting place to live, you know, the interesting time to live.
Okay, well let's key on that. You don't think you'll be alive 50 years from now, but you see David Sinclair, he just got
Mhm.
FDA approval for working on
Yeah.
he's starting with the eyes and it's kind of like de-aging technology for some people who, so um, you could potentially
Maybe.
forever. Right.
Maybe. Yeah.
One area I realized we didn't cover is YPO. You were a part of this organization, the Young Presidents Organization,
Yeah.
for 20 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I was. I was a YPOer since I was, I think, 30 years old. And so I was there for a long time. Eventually, I quit because rightly or wrongly, okay, but it just got to be for me, it just got to be too much. So I decided that I would just give it a break. And it's been a number of years since I've come back. I mean, I thought about joining as you know an an old YPO person, but I decided, well, maybe not. Yeah,
So, Ron, I mean, you've done it all and you're continuing to do more and you're keeping that energy up and that excitement and passion, and you're definitely curious. You definitely are always asking questions. You're exploring new ideas. You're observing continuously. You're running experiments. You definitely practice this idea called combinatorial thinking, connecting diverse ideas together. You're always networking. And and relating with other people. It's like the phone call I got from you back in the summer of 2011. Hey, Stephen, who are you? That's me. Who is this from?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And because you're always curious, right? And you're always engaging. You definitely are resilient. You're hardworking. You definitely persevere. You definitely have optimism in what you do. And one of the things that Vinod Khosla talked about when I did a fireside with him, and he's a legendary founder. He's one of the co-founders of Sun Microsystems, created the commercial computer marketplace, went on to Kleiner Perkins to become one of the most successful investors of all time. And now he has his own investment vehicle called Coastal Ventures, and he's been multiple times on Forbes Midas list. But he says you should read all the time on the edge or what's upcoming, and you definitely practice that. It seems like you're constantly reading. Every time something is surfaced to you that's futuristic or has some impact in the world, you will consume it and look at it. You'll ask questions about it. You'll do additional research on it. That's kind of really a fundamental part of who you are, your curiosity and just how active you are and passionate about what you do. So I can see you continuing this and enjoying it and smiling every day and looking forward with kind of passion of what will the day will bring to you. So you're a great model for the world to follow, and a North Star, really a beacon for others to model their lives on. You're definitely a model within your family, but also within the bigger Canadian community and the global community as well. So thank you for coming in and share so many different aspects of what you do and your past lives and now your future lives as well. So thank you again.
Stephen, thank you for your time. Much appreciated. You know all this stuff because I keep bugging you. I phone you all the time. Anytime I have a question, I phone you. So anyway, thank you for your time in more ways than one. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you again.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.